Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this fly tying tutorial we're going to tie a high visibility foam ant. Stay tuned. Here's a finished look of the high visibility foam ant. The key words are definitely high visibility. And we're going to talk a lot more about that during this video. So let me get a clean hook in the vise and we'll start tying this one. Let's start tying this high visibility foam ant. In my Stonfo transformer vise, I have a Hanak competition hook. It's their H130BL. That BL designation stands for barbless. This is a dry fly hook. It's a size 16, which tends to be my favorite size to tie this foam ant in, though I'll tie it as large as a size 12 and as small as a size 18. We're going to be using some uni thread 8/0. The color's black and that's paired with the foam body. I'm just going to start behind the eye of the hook. I'm going to wrap back past the halfway point and then return to my starting point. And next we're going to be adding in the foam ant material. This is basically just a black foam cylinder with a white head. To tell you a little bit about the vendor, I use Bill's Easy Sight foam ant bodies. I know there are other places that you can buy this. I know you can buy these specific ones on eBay, and I believe there are some other sellers of this style of foam ant. What I really like about this particular one though is it comes in a few different colors, black, rust, brown, cinnamon, and they have these different head colors, and we're going to be talking a lot about those during this video. The two main body colors that I use are black and cinnamon. The cinnamons are paired with an orange head, whereas these black ones that I'm using have a white head. And there's all these different sizes. To help kind of ease up from some of that confusion from all these different sizes, I tend to use size small with a size 16 and size 14 hooks. I use the medium ant bodies with a size 12 hook, and I use the extra small with a size 18 hook. Here's a quick peek at the cinnamon with the orange head. This is an extra small foam, so I'll use these with size 18 hooks. Now to lash these in place, you basically are just going to set them on top of the hook, and I like it so that that white portion sticking right past the eye, and there's a little bit extending past the bend of the hook. So once I have that lined up about where I want it, I'm just going to lash it in place with 3 wraps. And when I let go, if I pull down the thread a little bit, it's going to start to move this foam ant around the base of the hook. And that's what I want to have happen. In fact, I basically want to encourage this foam to spin 360 degrees, similar to spinning deer hair, because we know when it makes that complete rotation, that last wrap of thread is actually locking everything in place against the shank. So what I'm going to do is just start to pull down. You're going to see it start to spin. So I'm going to encourage that spinning and keep wrapping. And as it makes that rotation around and I pull down, it's now fully lashed. I can pull all I want, it's not going anywhere. Now what I'm going to do is pick up this back section, just wrap back a little bit, cheat back, and then lash down around 5 times, and then get back up to my starting spot. So what we've just done now is we've kind of done our best to replicate the actual segmentation of an ant. We have that back segment, the middle, and the front, plus we have our white hot spot. Now if you think about why we wrap back at the beginning, that was basically to cover the hook. So there's not this blinding glare coming out from the bottom, though I can't imagine the trout are going to be that picky. Next, the directions tell us to add our hackle. However, I'm going to fill you in on something I do to kind of cheat a little bit. Now this foam body, what's great about it is it's very buoyant. So I tend to fish this specific pattern in a little bit faster moving water. But whenever I'm casting this fly and it's going out 40 feet and I'm trying to hit this rising trout, it can be tough to see even with this white spot on the front. So what I do to kind of help out my eyesight is grab a little bit of Antron, and we're going to put in almost an Antron cider onto this fly. So I'm just going to grab some of this chartreuse colored Antron. I also love fluorescent pink. I'm going to pull apart a little section of it, and I only want around 20 fibers in there, so nothing crazy. Basically smaller than a parachute post. So once I have that, I'm just going to cut it away from the main hank, and then I'm going to double it around my thread and lash it directly on top of the foam. Just need a couple wraps in there. Now I'm going to transfer it to my right hand, and I'm going to twist it clockwise with my right thumb and my middle finger. There's a couple extra pieces. We'll just get those out of there right away. And then I'm going to make some helicopter wraps around it, basically creating a parachute post. Because I want to bind all of this Antron together. I just don't want it splaying all over the place. We want to keep as much of it on top of this foam body as possible, just so the trout don't get a chance to see too much of it. Once I have that lashed in place and I have it bound pretty tight, I'm going to make my first cut, and I'm going to cut it just above the foam. It's going to splay a little bit, and I'll probably make one final cut. If I was smart, I'd probably wait until the end, but I just kind of want to see how it's going to splay, see what those fibers are going to do, cut any away that are in my way, which there are none right now, and then add the hackle. So now let's add the hackle, and I already have a prep piece. This is a piece of black hackle. To prep it, I just took my thumbnail and I pulled away all the fluff, then I trimmed the stem real close to the feathers. Now I'm using a black hackle, and this is paired pretty nicely with this size 16 hook, but two things. Number one, don't be too critical about the size of the hackle. If it's one size too large, one size too small, it's going to be fine, because again, we're fishing this in faster water. So those fish, they don't have a lot of time to really discriminate against the size of the legs. Also, if you don't have black hackle, I also use grizzly pretty interchangeably with this color combination. Whenever I'm tying in the cinnamon ones, I'm going to be using either a brown or some type of barred brown hackle. Now to lock this in place, I'm going to be locking it with this base part of the stem. I'm going to lock it on my side. I'm going to make a couple wraps behind that parachute post. Again, going around the whole feather. Then I'm going to pull the post forward, make a couple more wraps over the hackle stem. Next, I'm going to grab my hackle pliers. I have a pair of Stoneville Elite hackle pliers. I really love these. They have a very significant spring in them. So whenever I pull it back, you can see that exposed kind of latch system. I'm just going to grab onto the top of the hackle. I'm only going to make 2 or 3 wraps. I'm just going to go down once. My first wrap is going to be then in front of my Antron. Go down, make a second wrap. Then at this point, you have to say to yourself, how are my legs looking? Do I have too many? Do I not have enough? In this case, I have more than enough legs. I'm not too worried about this hackle really floating it. Instead, we have that foam to float it. So at this point, I'm just going to hold my hackle up. I'm going to kind of wiggle my thread back and forth because I don't want to capture too many of those hackle fibers down. Once I have a couple wraps there, and I know my hackle is locked in place, I'm just going to kind of hold it out towards me. I'm going to sneak my scissors in there and trim it as close as I can. At that point, I'm simply going to take my thread and kind of pull all these other materials back. Just get one wrap or so in front, and then I'm going to go right to my whip finish. Let's try to get 4 or 5 turns in there. And I'm going to pull it back. I really want to push that thread back against that foam body. Whenever I cut, if I cut a couple hackle fibers, that's going to be okay. We just really don't want too many of them peeking out over the eye of the hook. So once I have that cut, now you can see I'm just going to splay the the Antron up a little bit. And at this point, if I think it's a little long still, I'm just going to cut it back a little bit. But you may not want to cut it back until you see this fly on the water. You want to make sure you can see that chartreuse, because that's really going to be our main indicator for this pattern. If you can't see that chartreuse, you probably can't see that white, and you're not going to see the fish taking your fly. So really make sure you have a significant sighter at that top that really will help you see this pattern. I'll give you a quick 360 of our finished high visibility foam ant. And now let's change the camera angle a little bit and talk more about how to fish this fly, and also compare it against the 2 previous ant patterns that I've shared on my YouTube channel. Now that we're finished tying and we kind of look back at some of the methods that I shared in the video, I hope that they're a little bit different than those that you probably expected before watching this. Basically, we want to do everything in our power to set ourselves up for success, to make sure we can see this fly whenever it's 30, 40, 50 feet away. Now, if you have any other thoughts or kind of tips for anybody out there regarding the tying portion of this fly, please, by all means, mention them in the comments section below for others to kind of learn and gather information from. But now let's shift into when you're going to be fishing with this fly. Now on YouTube, I've previously shared two other ant patterns that I just love. One is a CDC ant and one is a deer hair ant that was tied based on George Harvey's recipe. Now those are really my top two ant patterns, but I tend to fish those in really slower water whenever I have a fish that's being very particular. Basically that one fish that's just sipping, it's taking its time, and I really have the opportunity to lay an ant pattern in there and give that fish a couple seconds to look at it, inspect it, and hopefully eat it. However, whenever I fish really fast moving water, that CDC ant is not one that I turn to. It tends to take on a lot more of the water. Same with that deer hair at times. So I love to go with the synthetic. In this case, it's foam. So I'm going to be fishing this fly really against the banks whenever I have rising fish from June on. Basically in the eastern United States after June, for some reasons, once I start going through that dry fly selection, basically I'm saying I have a fish that's rising and I start to pick it apart and I say, is it feeding on, we'll say a blue-wing olive? It's not after I get a few drifts. Is it feeding on another mayfly or a caddis? No, and I start to get refusals. One of those top 5 flies that I almost always turn to is an ant pattern, because even if I don't see them around, fish just seem to love to eat ants. So once June hits, I am throwing ant patterns on a regular basis whenever I have rising trout. Now again, I like to fish this in fast moving water with maybe a little bit of a ripple to it, which is why I add that hackle, but most importantly, I add that Antron. I gotta be able to see this fly whenever it's rocketing down the stream. This is one of those flies that I tend to fish by itself. So with those other ant patterns, I'll fish those in tandem with other flies at times, just to kind of help me see them. But in this case, because we're adding that chartreuse or hot pink post to them, we can really see them kind of far away. And as they're really rocketing down, you'll see that fish whenever it takes them. And you really have just that split-second opportunity to set the hook before that fly just continues down its path. So that's kind of the method that I like to fish it. This is normally not a fly that I turn to in that first progression, but it's after I've tried maybe an emerger, maybe an adult, maybe a spinner of a mayfly. If I've gotten a number of refusals, I'll turn to this fly. And once I start to catch fish on it on a regular basis, then it will kind of elevate itself into that first selection or second selection during those optimal dry fly times. So I hope that you've had similar success with the ant pattern. I hope that you use them on a regular basis. And if you don't use them, by all means, get them into your box for June, for July, for August, for September. Those are 4 really hot months to use ant patterns. Again, if you're going to be fishing faster water, this is probably the one you want to start with. If you think you're going to be fishing a little slower water where the fish have a little bit more time to inspect the fly, then try out the CDC and the George Harvey one that I previously tied. In fact, I'll add links to both of those videos down below in the description of this one in case you want to go back and watch those too. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to watch more of these types of videos, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. Whenever you click on, I believe, dry flies, you'll notice I have a whole page that's dedicated to terrestrials. In fact, you'll click on fly tying videos and then terrestrials, and you'll see all kinds of different flies that I like to fish throughout the summer. I also have a Facebook and an Instagram account associated with Trout and Feather, and you're more than welcome to follow those. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com, or as always, I'd love to hear from you down below in the comment sections. What are your thoughts about this fly? And what are some variations of this that you tie? And also, how do you like to fish it? Once again, thank you everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Send